With Karen Dubois-Walton, there's no shortage of topics that the Municipal Voice could begin to cover. A longtime New Haven staff member who started during the DeStefano Administration, she serves as the Executive Director of the Housing Authority. In 2020, Governor Lamont appointed her to the State Board of Education, where she is now the chairperson. Despite these positions, she has also run some difficult campaigns for New Haven Mayor and State Treasurer. She joins us today on the Municipal Voice to discuss these topics and more. We'd like to thank our sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Karen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we've got quite a bit to cover today, so let's get right into it. You are currently the Executive Director of Elm City Communities, the Housing Authority of New Haven. Right now, New Haven has much of the state is in a curious spot in terms of housing. We're adding more, but it never seems to be enough. What, in your opinion, is the state of housing in the Elm City right now?
Yeah, you're so right that we're adding more, but it never seems enough. I think we're battling first decades and decades of underproduction on the housing front. Mm-hmm. And so across the state, we have not been building. And it's actually a national issue where the production of new units has really significantly lagged what our population demand shows. So we're feeling that very acutely. And then I think we're definitely feeling the impact of lots of people wanting to call New Haven home. Some of that is COVID related. Some of it is beyond that. But we, for a lot of reasons, have become an attractive place for people to want to be. So more and more folks are coming here. The other big impact on the housing market is that the rising cost of housing has not kept pace with folks' income growth, right? And so it's much more expensive to whether you're trying to buy or rent. And our wages and income has not kept pace with that, again, for decades and decades. So yes, a lot of housing is being built in the market. I think what we have to make sure is that we're building at all price points and that we are creating the right landscape. Some of that might be zoning reforms and things like that need to happen so that we can actually build to the scale that we need to build and not just at the highest end market rate. But build across all income levels.
But as you said, a lot of the kind of housing that's going up right now is market rate. Is there a figure where you can say, like, that's enough, we don't need any more of that?
I think there's a figure that we can say about sort of units that we need coming online. To say that we're at a point of that's enough on market rate, we probably aren't at that point yet. But what's skewing the market so is that we seem to be building so much at the really high price point. Things that are one bedrooms that are at $2,500, $3,000 a month rent. When we need to be seeing things, all the data says that the greatest need in our community is for folks who are compared to the sort of average median income in our area are making more like 50% of that, 30% of that. So that is certainly more units, but it's also we have to push for more subsidy when you talk about the really low income families. And that's probably mostly a federal and state conversation about how we get more assistance in while we're trying to build the economics that get people into better jobs that pay better wages and can begin to close that gap between wage and housing costs.
With the affordable housing, is there ever truly enough of affordable housing for New Haven?
I think if we think about affordable in the sense that none of our families should be paying more than 30% of their income, maybe 35% of their income toward their housing costs, then that's a price point we should be looking at across the spectrum. So that families then have the ability to afford the other things that families need. For some, it's childcare. For some, it's education costs. And a full life requires people having some disposable income too to play, to do fun things. So we absolutely need to keep our eye on that and ensure that we've got affordable housing across the board. But, specifically to what people think about affordable for the lowest income families, we have a crisis in this community. We have a crisis in this state that we have tens of thousands of families who cannot afford to live in our beautiful city, and are here and struggling. And so that means that they're sacrificing on other things. And it might mean they're on the brink of eviction, and it means that they are unable to provide the stability that their kids need to do well in school, and it disrupts their employment. And so it is a crisis, and we need to double down on it locally and as a state. Absolutely.
And obviously, affordable housing helps out the families in need of the affordable housing. But how does affordable housing benefit the community as a whole?
Well, really vibrant communities, and this is not just my opinion, but folks that look at this across the country, vibrant communities are those where we have real diversity within communities around income, around race and other demographic factors, and that the most vibrant communities are those that really best represent sort of that diversity. And so that requires that we have housing at various price points in order for us to really have that vibrancy. Secondly, though, affordable housing is actually an economic driver in communities. And there are lots of studies that have shown the impact both of building more affordable housing and the jobs it creates and the economic benefit to communities during that time of construction, but the longer term impact as well, the longer term jobs that are associated with the new developments, and the longer term economic impact of when you can free folks from putting all their money into rent, then those dollars cycle in your economy in other ways. And we've heard that discussion, on a lot of things as we think about the U.S. economy more globally and what's going to move us away from this place of recession. It's getting people back to the place where they can spend their money in the market, right? Yeah. And so affordable housing also helps in that way, because if every single one of my dollars is not going to just trying to keep the roof over my head and my lights on, then I actually get to maybe go to the store and buy something, or go out to eat. And those things obviously stimulate other growth in the economy.
Now, I know at the Housing Authority, you don't just deal with affordable housing. You also do housing choice vouchers, tax credit programs. What do New Haven residents need, and what do they expect from and want from their housing authority?
Well, at the very fundamental, they want that assistance that's going to allow them to live in really quality housing units in places of their choice at an affordable price point. And so, what we're doing with our redevelopment is significantly improving the quality of the housing that's offered. We have been tearing down and rebuilding throughout our portfolio so that families have housing that doesn't stand out as a community as, oh, that's where the poor people live. But it's quality. It's something that I would be happy to raise my family in and happy to recommend to other people. Yeah. So we certainly do that piece. But how, people need to have choice. They shouldn't be limited to only having to live in one of the developments that is run by a housing authority. And that's the power of the voucher program or the Section 8 program. So families expecting what they expect from us there, I think, is that they get eligible and qualified for their voucher, get that voucher in hand, and get some help being able to find quality housing in our community or beyond our community, because that's what a voucher allows. So there, I think we've got as a city a focus on making sure that the units that are available for people to rent are quality units, and that's a partnership with the city. And I think city housing policy needs to be focused on ensuring that what's out there in the rental market is quality. But it shouldn't just be in the city, right? A family might want to live in Brantford, and a voucher allows them to do that if they can find a unit in Brantford. So I think as a community, we have an obligation to make sure that those opportunities exist beyond our city limits. But also, we really see our role as helping families break out of a cycle of poverty. And so they also expect from us a number of services that can help them. Because I would venture to guess that for any of us, getting ahead has been more than just having a safe place to live. It's been that, and it's also been the mentorship and the connection and the access to resource and education and employment programs and just a friendly face and encouragement and motivation. And so, our team also provides that through our self-sufficiency programming and social service programming. And I think our families expect that from us too.
Yeah, a lot of good work going on there. I know I'm a resident of New Haven, and I've seen some of the public housing change over the years from, that really drab, awful, just brick blocks into now look like lovely townhomes and stuff. And it looks really great. One thing that's kind of unique in the area for New Haven is that we have a lot of short-term residents, all the college kids, Yale, tons of people coming in and out. With a transitory population, what vision do you have of New Haven for the New Havener? How do you make New Haven for the folks that want to make New Haven their permanent residence?
Yeah, I just had a conversation the other day with somebody who was talking about the fact that the Yale University, the center of our city, is over enrolling beyond the number of housing units that they have, dorm units that they have, and that they're requiring a number of students to live off campus. And they were asking me my thought about that and the impact on the housing market. And it definitely is putting pressure on the housing market. In terms of who landlords are renting to and an already limited supply. But while students are living in the community, I want them to be a part of the community. If they're going to be taking up a unit, then become a full part of our community and become engaged. But my hope overall for the city is that we will continue to be a city that welcomes newcomers. I think that's part of the DNA of New Haven. That will be a place where folks can come and can advance and grow and see New Haven as a place where they will want to be rooted and raise their family. I want to see us as a place with a growing middle class. I think that requires us ensuring that we address our issues around public safety. I think it requires us as a city addressing our issues around the public education system, because those are probably the two key things that people think about when they think about maybe moving from that expensive downtown apartment that they're renting and looking for the next thing in their life. Like, let me buy something. Let me establish roots. I think they think very much about what they can get for their money and how expensive it's going to be and what their taxes are going to pay for. Yes. But I think a lot of that decision is rooted in, am I going to feel safe? Am I going to be able to put my kids in the public schools? And am I going to be able to create a sense of community? And that's what I think New Haven is poised to really tackle in some big issues right now, and it will be a key to our continued growth.
I think now moving on, having you put on one of your other hats. You were recently appointed to the statewide Board of Education. On another one of the WNHH's shows, Love Babs, you talked about equity and excellence being the mission for Connecticut schools. This is a difficult topic for some people, but our schools statewide are not equitable. At least it seems that way. How do we work towards that?
Oh, I wish that wasn't a difficult topic. I wish that we all entered that conversation with the sense that every one of our learners should get what that learner needs in order to be successful. And that is essentially what equity is. That we ensure that we are getting the right resource, access, opportunity that meets that individual child's need. And so I think it requires tough discussions around school funding and school finance in the state, and that connects to property tax, and absolutely. But I think fundamentally what I'm happy about being in that chair and able to lead as this moment as we're developing our next 5-year plan for the State Department of Education and for public education broadly across the state, is I think we're at a point where our next plan will still talk about equity and still talk about excellence. It will center the ideas that we want students to be educated in classrooms where they have an opportunity to have an exchange of ideas and learn with kids of all kinds of different backgrounds so that they'll be prepared for the diverse world they're going out into. I think equity for me means that they will be exposed to teachers in classrooms all across our state, teachers that represent the great diversity of our state and the world they'll go out into. So yes, I want New Haven kids, a predominantly student of color population. I want them to have great teacher diversity, but I also want that in the suburban town of Branford. I want kids growing up there to also be exposed to teachers of different racial and ethnic backgrounds and different demographics, because I think that enriches their ability to go out into the world. I want all our kids to be exposed to a curriculum that is tested and that we know produces the right kinds of results that these skilled educators can then deliver, and a curriculum that represents the real cultural diversity, a culturally relevant curriculum. I don't want us to shy away in this time of people not knowing what critical race theory is and throwing it around and wanting to sanitize school libraries and ban books. I want us to actually develop in our young people critical thinking skills, develop in our young people a sense of the world beyond what they may have known prior, and a sense of their place in that world. And that requires critical thought and critical examination of the good parts of our history and the challenging parts of our history. So I want that in what we're building. And then, I at my heart, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. Everything I do in our housing communities and in education is about building whole people. And so, in our public schools, we also have to be addressing the social emotional needs that I think people are very attuned to coming through a COVID pandemic. But those needs have always been to think about that for our educators and everyone interacting with our young people, and to think about how we're supporting the social emotional development of our students. So that's sort of what we're leaning in on at the state board level, and trying to set policy and be supportive of local boards of ed in moving toward that.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. You mentioned, right now, the pandemic, obviously we're still coming out of it. It's been particularly crushing on public school. School testing has been down, and you mentioned some of the banning books, the trust in schools has been kind of on the decline. How do we rebuild confidence in our schools from the student-parent point of view?
Yeah, it's so disheartening because lots of what was seen during the pandemic was an unprecedented amount of collaboration between school and family, as everybody had to pivot in this way in school and community, and folks that jumped in to try to help public school and public education from all sectors, creating learning hubs and just so many ways. And so what I hope, and I think about the pandemic, we think so much about things that went wrong and got disrupted. I also want to think about what happened, what came together, what did we learn during the pandemic that we can carry forward. And I would hope that the way that community wrapped itself around public schools, even socially distanced, right, to be supportive, to say we're all in this together, that's a spirit we have to figure out how to bring forward. Even though we're, mostly back in person every day in schools. So I think if we can spend some time pulling apart the lessons of what it meant to connect more closely schools and families, schools and community, if we can think about now, even though we're in person, how to continue that sort of collaboration, I think that's going to be a start of what is a long process, and resist some of that sort of national trend that we're seeing to sort of pit folks against each other and to demonize one group or another.
All that cooperation during the crisis, and we want it to continue long after it's all over, definitely. On the flip side of this is teachers around the country are leaving the position, feeling undervalued in a lot of places. Connecticut's pay is a little bit higher than a lot of other states, but so is our cost of living. How do we attract teachers to Connecticut?
It's, we think about, again, with the pandemic and all the things we talked about and realized were so essential. And we valued our grocery store folks, and we valued our public school teachers, and we valued our truck drivers. And we've got to make that more than just words, right? It's got to be, that value has got to translate into our culture, into our reimbursement and salary structure and our work conditions. And we absolutely need to do that. And so focusing on teachers, this has been, and the pandemic certainly accelerated what was happening, but we were foreseeing this shortage of teachers and experiencing this shortage of teachers well before the pandemic. One of the things, my husband works in human resources in public school education, and this is something he's been working on for over a decade, around needing to diversify and recruit minority teachers, but addressing the shortage areas and the places where we knew we were going to have too few teachers. So a number of things were in place and really were able to be accelerated because of the infusion of some new dollars. So I'm excited that in this state we enhanced reciprocity. So there are additional states now where if you were certified, almost all up and down the East Coast now, and if you're graduating from a HBCU in Virginia, it's so much easier to get certified now because we're recognizing the certification from these other states as being reciprocal to Connecticut. So that's helpful. we're also growing our own. We have to think long term on this, and we have to, I'm always struck that if you go in a third grade classroom and you ask kids like what do they want to be, you'll get a lot of hands that will say I want to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, but by middle school, you're not getting that anymore. And so we need to stoke that was alive in our little ones when they were in elementary school. And I think the State Department is leading on some great teacher pipeline things that are starting in middle school and high school, starting to really support young people who have an idea they might want to be an educator, getting them some support all through high school, getting them into a college track and being able to support that way. I think that's going to be a part of our long term. We're doing a great loan refinance program right now, where if you're a public school teacher and you're teaching in the urban districts, you have an opportunity to refinance some of your loans, your student loans, and you couple that with what the Biden administration is doing. I think we've got some opportunities to add some incentives, financial incentives, while we're working on the teacher pay. But we can't back away from needing to address at the state level some of the things that would need to be addressed there around educational funding, so that the money going into districts can increase teacher pay. So we might need to take a look at teacher pension and how we can make some changes there that add an incentive. Right now, teachers work a long time before they can pull down. It's like over 37 years before they pull down their full pension, and it's tough work. And we should look at whether that's the right years of service and right investment strategy on the pension. So I think there are a number of things we need to be thinking about to ensure that the little kids that are starting in pre-K right now are going to go into classrooms all through their K-12 education with certified teachers and fully staffed classrooms.
So this kind of brings us to our final topic for today. Currently, our state struggles with seeing people of color in leadership positions, from local to state politics. Our representatives are overwhelmingly white. As someone who holds certain positions of power in local and state government, how do you think we can get more individuals of color into public service?
Oh, just like there's a pipeline we're talking about for educators, I think we need to build that pipeline as well for our elected officials and our public officials in that way. And so, I love some of the things that CCM has been engaged in hosting campaign school type events that are specifically targeted people of color to introduce, because you have to be able to see yourself in something to take that next step. And I think things like that, mentorship programs, and I think we have to work, because our elective electoral system in Connecticut is still very much dominated by two political parties. I think the political parties also need to do that sort of work about looking at how are they identifying new talent and bringing people into the process and into the pipeline, so that people are on the radar and get tapped. And particularly it's been noted for women that women have to get tapped. Men are much more likely, and that's across all races and genders. Men are races and ethnicities. Men are much more likely to raise their hand and throw themselves in for elected office. Women are much more likely to run when somebody has said to them, "Hey, I see you. I see you in this." So we have to do some of that tapping of and inviting people in to think about this as an opportunity. I say go to the places where people are already leading. You go to your school and you see who the class moms and dads. You see who's involved in organizing the after school things. You see who's leading and volunteering in some of those things. Those are your natural leaders that we should be thinking about. Hey, you know what? Those leadership skills, the voice you have, the constituency you're representing, like you would be a great alder. You would be a great state representative, right? You would be great on your school board. I think we have to do more of sort of looking at that and helping people make the connections and then inviting them and pulling them into it.
You mentioned before the campaign school at Yale. For the past 2 years, I know we at CCM have coordinated with them doing a virtual training session called Representation Matters, where we seek to open doors for people in communities of color to, if they're interested in running, to do so, kind of give them the know how the basics of how to run for office sort of thing. You've run hard fought races. What motivates you to run?
Just a passion for the people that I've been serving, and a desire to see change on a number of different fronts. Has will always keep me connected to public service, whether
Mm-hmm.
it is doing the kind of work I'm doing now or as a candidate.
Mm-hmm.
We need, and my career has been focused on fighting for folks who have been marginalized in many number of ways, economically marginalized, marginalized by issues of race, and ethnicity, marginalized on able-bodied disability
Mm-hmm.
spectrum. And I think we need to have folks who are setting public policy, who are connected to the issues, connected to people, and who have a track record of having been able to make change. And early in my career, I transitioned from being a direct service provider to getting into
Mm-hmm.
policy work because it was hard to. And my work was clinical work, and I was helping folks rebuild their lives after really difficult, traumatic experiences. And I wanted to move from fixing broken families, broken
Mm-hmm.
lives, to trying to create communities where people thrive, and setting the kind of policy that allows that to happen. That's what drives me. Other folks might have something else that drives them, but I think when you find that passion and you see that your voice is needed because the folks currently there aren't moving in the direction that makes sense, or haven't been effective, or people aren't following, right? You're only a leader if someone's following you.
Yeah.
If people aren't following, and you see that, and you know that you have the passion and you have the ideas and some track record of having moved something big or small, I think you should think about throwing your hat into, or start on a board or commission where you don't have to run for anything, but you can raise your hand and get selected by a mayor or a first select person to serve on some local committee or commission or board. Like, start there and see
Yeah.
see what it's like, because it can be intimidating.
Definitely.
And I think it's a way in and a way to get started. And maybe the bug will bite you and you'll say, hey, I want to keep going and have my name on the ballot.
We talked about how, it's still pretty tough to get into, but do you feel like there are more doors open in 2022 than maybe there were in 2002 or even 2012?
I think one of the things that I've seen shift tremendously in the time span that you're referencing there has been this broader notion that we need a more representative democracy, and that the issues, during the pandemic, where it was just so clear the economic disparities and the health disparities and how COVID impacted certain communities differently, got people really thinking about racial disparity and whose voices were heard and who was setting policy. On top of that, then we had the racial reckoning across this country with the police-involved murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and on and on and on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had people across the country and internationally taking to the streets, declaring, right, Black Lives Matter, racial equity. We need to lead from a place of equity. And so I do think that has shifted folks' thought about sort of who is in power, what decisions are being made, what does it mean to apply a racial equity frame, and who's best positioned to be in the seats of power to do that. I do think there's something different. Now, at the same time, it's a slow pace of change, right? My emails all end with my favorite Martin Luther King quote, which says, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It's long, and it does bend with good people pushing on it. It does. So the pace is slow, but I do think we've seen some really seismic shifts in people's awareness of issues of racial inequity, and connection to the fact that means we need to diversify who's on boards, who's in corporate governance, who's in elected office, who are our policymakers, and we really need to make it look more like the great diversity of our country, of our state, and of our beautiful city, New Haven.
So it sounds like you think like there's been a shift in perception of it, but there needs to be more work on the actually implementing those new ideas.
I think so. I mean, I think, as you mentioned, our government remains predominantly white. White folks running for office have had a hundreds of year head start and building that network and that pipeline, and that doesn't change overnight.
Yeah.
And deep seated for even the most liberal minded, thoughtful folks on equity, we still have grown up in a community that has instilled prejudices and biases deeply in us that are the sort of default that we have to continue to check ourselves around when they rear up. So it's continual work, and there's continues to be a certain thought about sort of who are leaders, and that causes people to look in a certain direction, and it's continual work to say, wait a minute, look over here. There are others. Have you tapped this, right? The pathway may not be the typical pathway, and that's good, and that's exciting to think about. But it does take some time. It takes some work, and it takes folks not willing to stay in it and not give up to make that happen.
And it's not going to be easy, but we got to keep trying.
Absolutely.
So in your most recent race, you had the endorsement of the Working Families Party. How much did that mean to you?
Oh, that was huge. That was huge. They came out for me early, even before the Democratic convention, and got behind me. And I tell you why it was so meaningful. And I had two party type endorsements that were important to me: the Working Families Party, and I got the Young Democrats endorsement. And I said to people that was so important because the Working Families Party endorsement was a stamp on my campaign that said, Karen is the one who has been working throughout her career and has the platform moving forward that has centered working families. She's the one who's been working to try to create opportunity and greater access and improve living conditions and broaden opportunities for families who are just hardworking families in our community. And that meant a ton to me. And then the Young Democrats, that was like, hey, she's the future. Like, we see that she sees us and recognizes and is trying to build something that's going to be here for those of us coming up to benefit from and thrive. So those were very meaningful to me. And
just a quick question, do you see yourself running again in the future?
I have no idea. I can tell you that very honestly, Matt. And that's a bit of what politics is. I can tell you what I know I'll be doing. It's something that has me in a role where I will be fighting to create opportunity for folks that have been shut out for so long, that are the last to be thought of, that have carried the burden for too long. So lower income families, families of color, families living with disabilities, families on the LGBTQ spectrum. I mean, I'm going to be fighting for those families to try to continue to move this democracy to the ideal of what it is supposed to be, and that I'll be doing. Whether it involves another race, who knows? Because so much of that, you learn in campaign school. It's about being prepared for something that you can't even foresee may align in a certain way at a certain time. And if I could move things forward from a point of elected office, I might. But if not, know that I'll be fighting here in New Haven for fighting the good fight for the good people.
Sounds good to me. And we always like to end on a positive note and talk about the future. How do you feel about the future of Connecticut and New Haven? Do you have an optimistic view for New Haven in terms of housing, education, representation, all of the above?
I fight really hard to keep an optimistic viewpoint on things because otherwise it would be really, really hard. I've shared with you earlier that I'm coming into this conversation with you just having left the funeral of a young person, a young man that my husband coaches boys basketball at Wilbur-Cross High School, go Governors, a young man that my husband coached, a young man that my two sons grew up with. And it would be so easy to come out of that moment just defeated, that another promising, amazing life was lost to gun violence in the city. I choose faith and I choose optimism and I choose to look toward what can we do to make a difference. And so I am optimistic because I believe in young people. And I believe in the way that young people are showing up and the way that young people are challenging beliefs that my generation didn't believe, and that keeps me optimistic. I'm optimistic because I do think people are reckoning with these issues of equity in a way that earlier in my career, It was rare to hear in the places that I'm hearing now. I have optimism because I think people are I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in this small, still blue, still progressive state and very progressive city, to want to try different things, try things that in other places people would never dare to, in that spirit of being a place, a haven for other people. And so that keeps me optimistic. And I'm optimistic because every day on this side is another opportunity to try to get it right, and to try to do something. And so, yes, I am optimistic.
Karen, thanks so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for CCM more broadly for shining a light on this issue of representation and creating that opportunity. And I'm happy to keep working with you on it.
We'd like to thank our guest, Karen Dubois-Walton. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Gateway Community College and Housatonic Community College. Learn more at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page. CCM's annual convention returns Tuesday, November 1st at the Mohegan Sun Convention Center. This year's convention will be capped off by Connecticut's final 2022 gubernatorial debate. Learn more at ccm-ct.org.